Welcome, Boston sports fans. My name is Jake Mazuski. You can call me JKE or EE for short, and this is Bosox Talk. So today, I have on here with me Gio Rivera, who is with Boston Sports Report, and him and I decided to join up a few months ago and really just embark on this new podcast, just breaking down all the newest breaking news that has been coming out of the Boston Red Sox. And I've just been reporting on all the different topics. And I decided to bring Gio on today to really give his insight on what to really look for during the Red Sox 2020 season. So how's it going, Gio?
It's going pretty good, pretty rough at the same time. How are you?
I'm doing great. So just wanted to start off, especially since spring training did just get into full force. Now we're seeing the full squad come out onto Fort Myers. And so it's really exciting, and there's a little bit of confusion and a lack of motivation, it seems like, within the fan base going into spring training. So I was just curious on, just first, what are your thoughts and really your anticipations on what the 2020 season will look like for the Red Sox?
I mean, like you mentioned, it's almost unusual sort of how we're heading into the season. There's very little optimism within the fan base, like you just touched on. And I can't really necessarily blame those fans for feeling that way because it's almost hypocritical what we've seen from the ownership. Like, we want to cut salary, but then we've got these rumors that completely contradict that. Then you've got the Eduardo Rodriguez, who's probably might be your ace based on what he did last season, and then the fact that you weren't willing to give him the $675,000 in arbitration.
Right.
So it's been kind of weird lately. It's very strange, considering all that's happened within the offseason, with scandals, contract disputes, and yeah, I can't necessarily blame the fan base for reacting like this. It's a very, very strange season. I can't really recall a season like this personally in my lifetime heading into a year with the Boston Red Sox. So that's pretty much my reaction.
I completely agree with you on that front, especially with how jam-packed with just all these different sort of reports, either it's good or bad for the reputation of the Red Sox. And it's just interesting, this being my first year of just fully just reporting all the different news for the Red Sox. Usually I just looked at the team as a diehard fan and would only analyze sort of what was happening on just like the fan mindset. But now really looking at it as taking that Red Sox bias out of it and really looking at it as a MLB fan, it's crazy about how much stuff has been going on surrounding the team. What you touched on with the payroll situation, with the scandal, with the firing of Alex Cora. And now we're even hearing that the investigation could be completed in the next week or so. So it'll be really interesting to see how that really just sort of affects the start of the Red Sox season. But I just wanted to touch on some of the most recent signings that have happened in the last week and a half. And one of them was Kevin Pillar. So Kevin Pillar signed a one-year deal for $4.25 million. And he's still only 31 years old. And I was very surprised of how great of a value the Red Sox actually did get for Kevin Pillar, especially with how consistent and very explosive his bat was compared to the past seasons that he has had in the major leagues, when he hit 259 with 21 home runs, which was a career high for him. And so I was just curious on your thoughts of the Kevin Pillar signing.
Well, for one, let me give you your credit, since you were the one who pretty much, made that prediction about Pillar prior to it actually going down. So I'll give you credit for that one. Personally, I like the Pillar signing. And like you said, for $4 million, I didn't expect that to be, what he'd get in the market after his season last year. Yeah, so he's a great hitter at Fenway Park. He's played 47 career games. He bats over 300. He's a great glove. He's always been the guy people compare Jackie Bradley Jr. to back in Pillar's days with Toronto, and like, who's the best defensive outfielder out there in the American League East. So I like the signing. It's again unusual, sort of what he ended up getting in the free agent market. I thought he'd get a little more than that, but for $4 million, you're getting a fantastic defensive outfielder who can really put the bat on the ball pretty well. And I love the signing personally.
I completely agree with you. And just for all the viewers that don't know what Gio's talking about, with him giving me credit for predicting it earlier in this offseason. So actually in the middle of January, I was just looking at the different free agents that if the Red Sox did trade Jackie Bradley Jr., which I fully anticipated them to do throughout this offseason, but they decided not to. And so I thought Kevin Pillar would be the perfect replacement, just like Gio said, with his amazing play in center field and his very consistent bat that he had throughout last season. And the stats were so comparable between Jackie Bradley and Kevin Pillar. It just blew my mind. And then also just looking at the value of each player, you know, Jackie Bradley's making $11 million a year, and Kevin Pillar was making $5 last year. So just looking at the comparison that I made, it was just eye opening, and it was something where I was just like, Hein, come on, just find a way to trade Jackie, get that payroll out of there, and bring Pillar in. And so when I saw this report first come out that the Red Sox were in deep talks with him, I was sort of kind of confused because after the Mookie trade, especially with how late it happened, especially with spring training just like a week away, I was like, all right, going into the spring training, this is our team. And now it just seems like Chaim Bloom is just finding all these different needs that the Red Sox could really use during the season and just finding a way to get what he has done throughout his past, 5 to 10 years in Tampa Bay, find those low value, high reward players in free agency and really get them for a pretty low price. And just looking at what Pillar is able to do, you talked about his defensive ability, how great his bat has been able to develop over this last year. But he actually swiped 14 bags last season, and it was the 5th straight season where he had that many. And so he could bring some speed to the Red Sox, that they lost with Mookie Betts. And there isn't really too much speed in that outfield other than Jackie Bradley Jr. And it's not like Alex Verdugo's a speedster by any means. So I was really excited with him being able to, complement all those left-handed hitting outfielders and really be able to make an impact starting this season.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That was also a signing that, I'm really glad that came to, obviously, but like you said, I also anticipated if it went down, it would be after Jackie Bradley Jr. trade. Even at $11 million for another team, you're getting a great value at Jackie Bradley Jr. for what he brings defensively and what he can do offensively. But overall, I just feel like there's almost a sense of unawareness with the Red Sox this offseason. And, I try because obviously he's coming in the hot seat, his first year. We've seen in the past with other general managers how they're pretty much under pressure from ownership. You look at Ben Cherington, who was essentially like a puppet to ownership and what he had to do in that seat. So I don't know, but personally, I'm interpreting this offseason as just extremely disorganized, really unaware, and I don't know. It's really hard to have any sort of high hopes headed into 2020.
That's a great adjective that you just used, very disorganized. I hadn't thought about that because I was just looking at it as I'm very confused and not really knowing what direction the Red Sox were going in throughout this entire offseason.
I don't think they do either.
Exactly. And it seems like they're kind of just, working on it throughout day in and day out. And really, in all reality, even as baseball fans, we know that that's not how to successfully build a baseball franchise, especially when you're thinking about how good are these decisions for this season. And so just really touching on where Kevin Pillar could really play, because he brought up if he were to play center field, that's in his mind sort of out of the picture when he brought up when he said when he first reported to spring training of obviously with Jackie here, I wouldn't see myself as anybody that is going to play center field. And I was lucky to have a little experience last year moving to the corners, but I'm just here to help in any way that I can, try to go out and try to be the best version of myself. But it actually came out from WEEI about 3 days ago that the Red Sox have discussed Pillar playing center field and moving Jackie Bradley Jr. to right. And so I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
I didn't hear that report, but that's extremely confusing personally in my mind. Obviously, we know Verdugo's not, well, according to reports, he's not going to make opening day. I don't know if there's going to be some sort of, like Chris Young platoon type of role with Kevin Pillar, but I mean, personally, from what I see from him defensively and his development, as you pointed out, offensively, I want to see him play more games out there. I still think there's a possibility that Jackie Bradley Jr. could be on the move to clear up space. That's a very confusing sort of, situation the Red Sox are in. Obviously, you look at Verdugo, when he gets back, you want him to play as many games as possible. You look at Andrew Benintendi, who you just locked on for 2 years, $10 million. You need him all season long. So it's kind of weird that, with the two guys, Pilar and Bradley, if you want them to fully flourish, you need them to play, a large extended period of time throughout the season.
Very true, and throughout the past 2 to 3 years, Jackie Bradley has sort of really kind of ticked me off in his offensive ability, because I've heard year in and year out, Jackie Bradley's going to go down to AAA, he's going to redo his swing, and every single year it's like Jackie Bradley changed something in his swing or changed something in his stance. And, he went out last year and he hit 20 home runs, but his average is still down in the 220, like 200 range, and that's really not going to help out the team, especially with what we saw last year. We were barely even able to get over 80 games of wins. So we definitely need to see him step up this season. But with reports coming out this afternoon that the Red Sox are still talking to Will Myers, it really just brings up the question and really points to your point of that Jackie Bradley could be on the move very soon, especially with Will Myers still having $61 million owed to him over the next 3 years. And really just what you talked about with how much money the Red Sox are spending and them really having zero plan, it seems like, with how they're really going to allocate all these different salaries. And so I just have a question to you. Do you think with these talks or these rumors coming up about Will Myers, does that really point to that Jackie Bradley could be on the move in the next few weeks?
I mean, if Jackie Bradley's on the move and it means Will Myers comes in, personally, I want no part of it. Like you just said, Will Myers is, what you said, $61 million left in salary.
Yep, over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I want no part of that contract. I want no part of Will Myers personally. Like, you look at Will Myers, how far is he from Bradley? He hit better last season. He hit 239, 18 home runs, but he's not as good defensively as Jackie Bradley Jr. is. And Will Myers has some injury concern too within the past few years over in San Diego. He was a guy who was a highly coveted prospect coming out of Tampa Bay after he was traded from Kansas City. And he's been really slow with his development personally. I want no part of the Will Myers contract at all. It's very contradicting to what the Red Sox claim they want to do. And John Henry personally, what he quote unquote wants to do. When you take David Price, you go out and you acquire another salary dump and you do San Diego a favor. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I want no part of Will Myers in the Red Sox outfield. I don't want to touch that $61 million. I'm perfectly fine paying JBJ $11 million to do what he does versus paying $61 million to Will Myers and for what he does. So that's my take. I want no Will Myers.
I completely agree with you on that. And it just, even looking at this report, like I tried to wrap my head around it and try and fully understand and put myself in Chaim Bloom's shoes. And I had that whole perception of maybe we could move him to first base, but I had that thought even before we signed back Mitch Moreland. So I just don't understand where Will Myers will fit on this depth chart, because there's still a thought of where will Michael Chavez go? It's really just a whole question. This whole depth chart is just kind of seems like a mess of where everybody's going to play. But obviously Chaim Bloom has it somewhere in his head all figured out. And I guess Red Sox fans are just left to try and figure it out until we actually see a lineup card. But at the same time, it's just what you touched on. Will Myers only hit 239 last season with 18 home runs. And he did hit over 25 home runs, but that was in 2016, 2017. That was when he was on his rise, and right when he got traded from the Rays to the Padres, and when everybody had huge high hopes for him. And then we just saw his development completely dip. And he's 28. And when you really look at that age, obviously you think, oh, that's not too bad. But when you compare it to Jackie Bradley's 27, 28. He's the same. He's in the same boat. And so the only thing that I would really think of is that the Red Sox wouldn't want to re-sign Jackie Bradley next season, and that they would just want some insurance until 2022 when Will Myers' contract ends. That's the only explanation that I can really have for these rumors.
Yeah, I mean, when a rumor like that comes out, you got to find any sort of explanation you possibly can to justify it. So I get from that perspective a little bit. I still, I agree that it could be their mindset. I don't agree with it at all. And sort of beating the bush, getting a guy established here and locked down for a while. Listen, Will Myers still has time to sort of flip the switch on his career and develop. But when you look at the Red Sox and their situation personally that they're in, they're not in place to sort of, play with lottery tickets and scratch cards to bring in $61 million. Let's play with this. Let's see what he can do. Let's see if he can sort of flip the switch in Boston. If this is a place for him to redevelop and retool. You still got Mookie heading into free agency next year, and Lord knows what, obviously internally the fans, the players weren't happy about that. So playing with $61 million when your, philosophy was to dump salary and to clear it out so that you can head into free agency and retool and have a fresh start and a fresh beginning, it doesn't make sense personally. I don't think the Red Sox should play that game.
I completely agree with you. And just another sort of head-scratching report that came out is that a pitcher named Cal Quantrill is one of the main centerpieces for this Will Myers deal. And it just really makes me take a step back and really try and fully just think of and sort through everybody on the roster and try to figure out who would the Red Sox even send over, because, they're going to need somebody to offset this huge salary that they're bringing in for Will Myers. Or the Mookie Betts trade and David Price trade didn't even, it didn't even matter. And so Quantrill, he's only 25 years old. In the MLB last season, he was 6-8 with a 5.16 ERA. Obviously, that's not great, but he was still a rookie. And when he was in AAA, he had some mediocre numbers throwing with a 4-2 record and an ERA of 4.50 or 4.54. And so, just looking at the salaries, the only explanations of people that the Red Sox could potentially trade are guys like Nathan Eovaldi and Jackie Bradley Jr. Mm-hmm. And Nathan Eovaldi could make sense because they could just slot Quantrill right into the rotation. But that just offsets $17 million of Eovaldi, and there was past rumors that they would try and get that salary off. But just going off your point of the whole mindset, not only of like the Red Sox fans, you got to think about the players. You saw how upset Xander Bogaerts was. You saw how upset Jackie Bradley Jr. was. These guys came up through the system together. And so if the Red Sox lose Mookie Betts and Jackie Bradley in 2 weeks, guys like Xander Bogaerts and JD Martinez are going to take a step back and really think, especially Xander Bogaerts, why did I just sign this 4-year deal to be on a team where I know where like none of my best friends are on the team anymore? Obviously, that's baseball and business, but there's a reason why JD Martinez and Xander Bogaerts decided to sign back with the Sox, even though JD is only for this one season. But it's because of that great sort of chemistry that they had in the locker room, and now it seems to all just be falling apart.
No, I totally agree with you. And the weird part is, this is the Red Sox we're talking about. This is Boston. This is, a team that is always known for doing things the right way and keeping and, applying great conviction and emphasis on chemistry, and to sort of, like you said, like dismantle that. For next season, I get it to an extent because you're in position to where you're sort of rebuilding. Expectations aren't the highest, but going about it the way the Red Sox have and, applying a salary dump with my back even more, it's kind of weird. It's really strange. It's almost sacrilegious, against everything the Red Sox are sort of known for and about. And it kind of brings to question, like does JD Martinez want to stay here? That's something we got to think about. Is Xander Bogaerts going to want to stay here? And does that impact sort of, Rafael Devers' mindset going into years down the line?
That's a good point.
Technical group, and, despite what happened here, rankings, the Red Sox were top 3 in damn near everything. So if you want to, you got to sort of come to question what you're doing and what you're jeopardizing there.
I completely agree with you on that. And just touching on another signing that the Red Sox had just this morning with Jonathan Lucroy, it's another signing that just really I just didn't fully understand it. I saw the signing. I'm like, well, thank God Chaim Bloom's actually doing something. He's not sitting on his hands anymore, because it seemed like for the 4 months that we had of the offseason, he was doing absolutely nothing. He was just showing up to the office, just sitting on his hands, just maybe shooting some hoops. Or, it just didn't really seem like he was really focusing on what was going on with the Red Sox. And just with this time, like we just got to remember, spring training just started 2 days ago. all these guys
Mm-hmm.
are together and working together. They already have these wicked strong relationships, but they're obviously talking. And so if you just trade Jackie Bradley in the next week or so, oh my gosh, the chemistry on this team is just going to diminish. But just going back to the point of Jonathan Lucroy, he signed a minor league deal. He's still only, I shouldn't say still, he's 33 years old, but he was one of the most productive all-around backstops through 2012 through 2016. And I just remember him on the Brewers. And a great point of this is that he was managed by Ron Renicky for a good amount of time. And so they do have this great relationship. But Lucroy just diminished and just declined so quickly throughout his career that we've seen over these past 3 seasons. He's only been able to hit 248 in 1,263 plate appearances. And so the reason I scratched my head when I saw this report is the Sox already have Christian Vasquez and Kevin Plawecki as their potential, starting catcher, backup catcher. And then they also have 2 or 3 guys in the minors that are on the invitee list for spring training that are already trying to fight for that 3rd catching spot. And so this was just a signing that, I don't know, it just didn't really make too much sense to me. It just really looked like a signing where we could see Jonathan Lucroy in Pawtucket throughout maybe half of the season or so.
Yeah, it reminded me. Do you remember a few years back when the Red Sox signed Carlos Delgado?
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. It's like he's here, was a big name at one point, but he's never going to get to Boston. That's personally how I see it. I don't see the Lucroy thing making any sense at all. It seems more so like a waste of money more than anything. And people in, where the Bosox moving to, Worcester or whatever. Yeah, go to Worcester, go watch. Yeah, Lucroy. Yeah, you look at Christian Vasquez and the, incredibly phenomenal season he had last year. Doesn't have a place here in Boston, really, unless this is like for injury or whatever. But I don't see how he fits here. Getting out of at all next year.
I mean, it was a signing where I looked at it like, if this was 4 years ago, I'd be jumping out of my seat because I was looking at Jonathan Lucroy being like, wow, this catcher's hitting over 15 home runs a season. When have you seen that before? But just especially when they signed Kevin Plawecki, I just had the mindset of he is going to be the backup catcher. There's a reason why we traded Sandy. One, because Sandy was owed $2.8 million this next season, and Plawecki's only being paid $500 to $6,000 because he signed on a very low contract. But at the same time, Plawecki's a guy who used to be a top prospect going through the Mets farm system. And so he was a guy that I was very excited about and a guy that I looked at as a perfect low-risk, high-reward player that Chaim Bloom saw and was like, how is nobody gonna snag this guy and try and develop him into what he was supposed to be? And so, like you touched on, the signing doesn't really make too much sense. And I think it's just going to turn into a battle in spring training, and the Red Sox are just going to see what happens. Yeah, so this Lucroy signing really didn't make any sense to me. And so really just touching on his past manager, because like I talked about before, Lucroy has gotten managed under Ron Renicky, who is the new interim manager for the Red Sox. And I was just curious on your thoughts on the Red Sox finally naming a manager, but everybody sort of had the feeling it was going to be Ron Renicky, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the new hiring.
Well, I mean, I'm personally a big Alex Cora guy, and you saw with, I think it was the Wall Street Journal who reported that the investigation really isn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an Alex Cora hopeful and him coming back, and you kind of look, and they did quote unquote part ways, and this is a quote unquote interim manager. Something I was really hoping for, sort of being a Cora hopeful, was that we hire from within, because that sort of keeps the seat warm, and then it slides it over if you want to bring Cora back. Which, with this development, with this report and this investigation, it seems like it's going nowhere.
Right.
Personally, Rob Manfred is doing his best impersonation of Roger Goodell and completely making this game a mess with his proposals, with the way he's handling this entire situation with sign stealing and the scandals and whatnot. Right. So this isn't just a Red Sox mess. The MLB is in a really, really bad place from within. But I mean, baseball has been getting really, really, low views. If anything, this is doing good for baseball as far as getting people talking about the sport to a sense. But yeah, the Ron Renicky thing I think does well by Alex Cora and sort of the hopes that he can come back, which we all saw from the players in their quotes after he got quote unquote fired or parted ways, that Cora, plays a huge part in the Red Sox. Like you just mentioned, chemistry is major with these teams. And you saw after Cora was hired, he did his best to prepare to sort of, get a sense of his guys. He flew on planes from country to country to meet the players face to face, to introduce himself, to get a feel for them. That's something that's major and something that isn't required personally from a manager, but it's something that he did anyways. So I don't know. I think there's still hope that Cora will be back with this whole interim thing. And, like I said on countless, numbers of times, we don't have a whole lot of expectations for the Red Sox heading into next year. So it's not like we were in a rush to get an established manager, in here. And that's personally what I think the Ron Renicky thing is.
And so I completely agree with you on that. And so it'll be very interesting to see where the investigation is taken, especially just for the Red Sox. But most importantly, what Alex Cora will get punished, not only if he had anything to do with the Red Sox scandal, but especially with the Astros scandal, because we have heard absolutely nothing about what the punishment could be for Alex Cora, especially when just a month and a half ago, we saw Jeff Lunau and AJ Hinch both get fired. And I just remember when both of those firings happened, or suspensions that turned into firings, is that it came out that the Alex Cora verdict was going to be coming out very soon, and that was one of the biggest reasons why the Red Sox had parted ways with him. And so it will be really interesting to see, especially with this new interim tag, if Ron Renicky will return after the season, and also depending on the different punishments, if we could see Alex Cora back in the Red Sox dugout in 2021. But just looking at the process that the Red Sox went through with the managerial search, it was on the day, I think it was one day before pitchers and catchers were going to report, and that's when they announced it. And just at that moment in time, I was like, well, that's kind of obvious, Heim, because I've heard throughout this offseason that Ron Renicky, throughout these last two seasons, have put on all the spring training festivities, and is in charge of everything that goes on down in Fort Myers for these past 2 years. And so it wouldn't really make any sense whatsoever if you were just going to bring a guy on, have him meet everybody one by one during the first day of pitchers and catchers, and then just figure out what he's going to do on the fly. So when this report came out, it was sort of a foregone conclusion. And something that I thought was interesting that Heim touched on in the press conference, talking about the interim tag, is he said, after talking through it as an organization, we felt naming Ron as interim manager was the best way to respect the investigation that's going on into our 2018 club. But we feel very strongly about Ron's ability to lead this group and how well he is suited for this task. And Ron Renicky managed the Milwaukee Brewers through 2011 to 2015 and had a 342 wins with 331 losses. And he was actually able to lead the Brewers in 2011 to an NLCS. And so it'll be really interesting to see what experience he'll be able to bring from the Brewers to the Red Sox. And I'm just curious your thoughts on really what these past 2 years have been able to do to help Ron Renicky sort of prepare for this very interesting sort of situation he's in, but especially with the relationships that he has now with the players.
I agree with the Ron Renicky hiring, honestly. I think, when you look at the Red Sox, you look at them in spring training, they're a very tight-knit, almost family. So you saw the reports of guys like Veritek, potentially Mike Lowell. They weren't going to bring anyone in that wasn't aware of the players and aware of the culture within the clubhouse. And that's something that I completely agree with. I'm all in on the Ron Renicky hiring, quote unquote, whatever. I think he's in great position with what he's been able to see with these past 2 years, in being, Cora's sort of right-hand man in the dugout and managing, a lot of personalities on this team. I completely agree with Renicky. And like you just mentioned, he's had experience over in Milwaukee. He's seen firsthand sort of Cora handling these guys Obviously, it's a little different with some of them being gone, but and I think personally, it was the best move for the position that the Red Sox are in, and what they're trying to do heading into 2020.
Very true, especially when the Red Sox actually did make the decision to part ways with Alex Cora. I just looked at my watch and was like, tick tock, tick tock. It's a month until spring training starts. Like, are
Yeah.
we really going to try and scrap all these guys together and figure out, especially in such this critical time? Well, what we've touched on throughout this entire podcast is obviously there isn't huge expectations for the Red Sox this season, but it is a very critical time in their history with what we saw at the start of the season with their payroll and really with all the question marks throughout the team. But just to make a point of what Matt Barnes said about the hiring of Ron Renicki is he stated he's awesome and he knows the game incredibly well. And I think it was nice having a familiar face with somebody who knows the guys, who's been there, and who has the experience that he has. And so to go off of your point, it'll be really cool to see what the experience that Ron Renicki has had throughout these last 2 years and how he's going to be able to bring it into this next season. And we've even seen it, in my opinion, throughout his press conferences and everything that he has done since he has gotten hired. He's really been very professional about this whole process. And even when questions about, Alex Verdugo and Chris Sale, he was very knowledgeable. And it made me pretty confident going into the season that we have somebody who's managing us that obviously really cares about the team, but really knows what he's doing and is very knowledgeable about the culture of the team.
Yeah, I agree. And again, that's a major thing when you're in a very unusual position like the Red Sox are in. Not too many teams typically in baseball are a week or a month or a few days, from spring training and don't have an established manager in there yet. So personally, hiring an outsider didn't make any sense to me whatsoever, and I'm glad they didn't go with that direction. I'm glad that they hired someone from within. And if any outsider came in, I'm, I personally expected it to be, a former Red Soxer or someone who's been around the organization for a while. So I'm glad that they went from a within hiring, and I think ultimately they're going to benefit from it heading down the stretch into next year.
I completely agree with you on that, and especially with the most recent moves that have been happening over these past 2 weeks, the Red Sox definitely needed a strong manager to really help bring them up and motivate them going into this next season. Because 2 weeks ago, one of the best players in the MLB got sent over to LA, and we really saw it during this press conference that he had with the Dodgers. If nobody has any sort of sense listening right now of what nonverbal communication is, Mookie Betts showed every single sign of nonverbal communication that he did not want to be in LA. Every single time
Oh my God!
every single time anybody talked about, oh, so how'd you feel about the trade? So I remember listening to what MLB Network, Mookie Betts, how does an LA Dodgers sound? And he's like, sounds kind of weird. I've been in Boston for all this time, and it was just made me take a step back and be like, see, we could easily see him with the Red Sox in 2021 because it just completely shows of how upset he is that this trade actually went down. I want to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I'm obviously a big Mookie guy. I asked plenty of people who went, well, we had to make this trade. You can't pay this guy that much. I said, let's take a step. Let me ask you, who realistically in your lifetime is better than Mookie Betts that you've seen in a Red Sox uniform? You listen to Buck Showalter and his take on Mookie Betts. He says he's the best right fielder he's ever seen. Look how long Showalter's been around baseball.
Seriously.
It's incredible. I understand from the perspective if the Red Sox plan, which I'm hopeful and, considering John Henry and the imbecile that he can be at times, I don't even know if he has a plan. The direction that, okay, we dump, quote unquote dump because you're still paying half a price of salary. Send that over to LA. It's a year where we're not really hopeful that we're going to contend. We bring Betts back next year. If that's the plan, if that's the mindset, cool. You got Verdugo, you got that catching prospect, and you got Jeter Downs. Cool. But if that's not your intention, if you handle this, if you butcher it the same way you butchered the Lester thing, then there's completely no justification for this whatsoever. Betts, again, is the second, at worst case scenario, third best player in all of baseball. the best player you've seen in Fenway Park since what, Ted Williams? And I don't even think
Hmm.
Ted Williams was defending like that. So you gotta sort of look at this and go, what's our plan going to be, and are we willing to pay this guy what he's worth? I really, it didn't rub me the right way, the whole notion that Betts is money hungry, he's money greedy. Listen, these guys are billionaires. They have the money to pay you what. And personally, my issue with it is if you let Betts walk, say he takes $400 million, goes to like San Fran or stays in LA or whatever, you're going to still have to pay someone a big time contract. And look at the Red Sox recent history with signing outsiders like Sandoval, like Hanley Ramirez, like Carl
I was
Crawford.
just about to say
How
Carl
does that
Crawford.
ever work out for the Red Sox? You don't sign outsiders when you have homegrown talent. That's the second best player in baseball. When was the last time we've ever seen that? And we're going to completely abuse it and completely dismiss it. It's unreal to me personally.
You could even bring up the name Rusney Castillo,
I forgot that one, yeah.
who still has been in AAA since he came up in 2016. But that just completely talks to our point. But just talking about the whole Mookie money aspect, to all the viewers to all the listeners that didn't know, the Red Sox had offered Mookie Betts a 10-year, $300 million deal 2 offseasons ago. And then this past offseason, Mookie Betts countered with that with a 12-year, $420 million. And so just really looking at the two values, with the Red Sox offer, he would be making $30 million. And then with Mookie's offer, he would be making $35 million, which would go perfectly and would be the exact contract that Mike Trout, who is the best baseball player on the planet, got last season. But if Red Sox fans just have the whole preconceived conception that this is Mookie Betts talking, no. This is Scott Boras, the most money-hungry agent in sports. And he was able to make over $1 billion this past offseason, and all the insane money
Must be nice.
figures that he was able to make this past offseason. And so it really sort of makes sense, the offer that Mookie Betts did give to the Red Sox, because of how much value Scott Boras obviously sees in Mookie. But a lot of people were really upset that, Mookie wanted to leave the Red Sox. He gave them that huge offer because he knew that they wouldn't take it. I'm sorry. At least he gave him the number. He gave him $420 million. He wanted to make $35 million a year. You could have given him 10 years, 11, 12, 13. As long as it was at a $35 million value, he would have taken it. And so all the people talking about that Mookie wanted to leave, all this sort of stuff, you can see on his face, he did not want to leave the Red Sox. And I wouldn't be surprised if he came back this next season. But just really also touching on who the Red Sox got, you touched on Verdugo, you touched on Jeter Downs, you touched on touched on Connor Wong. But just really looking at Verdugo, a lot of people were very upset going into this week, especially since Verdugo just came into spring training. And it came out that he has stress fracture in his lower back. We already knew this. And I don't know if the Red Sox fans knew this, but just doing my research about Verdugo, he had to stop playing last season during August because he had back issues. Now, the Dodgers and the Red Sox, the Dodgers didn't 100% know that this was going to progressively get worse throughout the offseason, and he would start doing treatment during the offseason to hopefully make it a little bit better. But Ron Renicky came out and said that if everything goes right, he still may not be ready for opening day. And he talked about how slow of a process to be able to fix this sort of fracture in his back, and just really just thinking about how this injury happens with the rotation. And it's a very well-known injury that happens throughout baseball. And so I just want to hear your thoughts, Gio, on how this could affect the Red Sox, in the short term and potentially in the long term if these back issues do come up in Verdugo's career with the Red Sox over these next 5 years.
I mean, this is where that whole unawareness thing I mentioned earlier in this pod comes into play. Look at the I can't even pronounce the guy's name, Grattal, whatever his name is, the pitching prospect from Minnesota.
Oh, yeah, Bruce Dog Grattal. I looked up the pronunciation like 80 times.
I can't do it for the life of me. And the fact that you look at the concerns with him, and he reminds me of the whole Daniel Bard situation where the guy can gun it, but he's still got concerns of can he do it can he pitch, 150 plus innings? It's so weird to me how unaware and out of touch the Red Sox are to an extent. And I feel for Chaim Bloom because he's under pressure trying to satisfy both the fans and ownership, who they have ways of satisfaction. The fans want wins, and ownership appears to just want profits. So it's really tough from his perspective and trying to do a job, trying to do his. But if Verdugo doesn't, come in here and perform, and give us, 150 plus games his first year at least, the Red Sox are going to have a lot of questions to answer if this doesn't result in you bringing Mookie Betts back.
Right.
And it's going to be a really, really tough off season. Already you raised ticket prices 1.7%, and I don't have, the highest hopes in seeing sellout crowds out there next year. So the Red Sox themselves are in the hot seat in answering questions.
It actually came out yesterday that their sales were down 15% since the
15%
since the ticket raise. Yep. So that's a nice little indication to John Henry that maybe people aren't too happy about what's been going on with the team lately. But sort of what you touched on about how Verdugo has all this pressure on him, and thank God that at least the Red Sox got a guy as their centerpiece who was a Red Sox fan, growing up. It's not like the kid has a lack of motivation to really hit the ball out of the park at Fenway, because he touched on it in his press conference, in his first press conference in spring training. He remembers like it was yesterday when he was running around the bases in Fenway Park. He felt like it was his childhood dream. So hopefully that drive and motivation goes into his bat and helps him hit all these home runs that, we have, he does have very impressive stats with the Dodgers. And it's something, he's a guy that I had a ton of high hopes for if the Red Sox would potentially get him. But when they did get him, especially for a player like Mookie Betts, you just take a step back as a fan and really think and try and look at both of their values and try to fully sort of understand where this is all going to fit, and if Verdugo could actually exceed expectations on where we think he could be during these next 5 years. But just not even touching on his play, he's had some issues off the field that actually came up. And I read extensively in an article yesterday about the sexual assault issue that he had over in LA. And I don't want to touch on it too much, but it's just something that could be brought up time and time again, not only because it came up within the first 10 minutes of his press conference in Fort Myers, but it's just something that, Red Sox fans could be kind of concerned about this guy's personality and about this guy's reputation, because, when you thought about Mookie Betts as a Red Sox fan, you thought about this huge smiling guy who loved the city of Boston and would do anything to help out really any sort of charity or anybody in the city of Boston. So I just want to hear your thoughts on sort of, Verdugo's past reputation.
Yeah, and you're talking about Betts, who's a guy who plays a World Series game and goes and feeds the homeless like 10 minutes later. It's unreal what that guy, sort of how he really was grateful for what he has and the humbling person that he was. I recently heard the Verdugo thing. Personally, I wasn't aware of it at all. But then again, it's not my job to be aware of this. It's their job. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it only adds to the sort of dysfunction and the disorganization and the debacle that is this offseason. And those are questions that you're going to have to answer. You look at the Patriots and sort of how they handled the thing with Antonio Brown. These questions are going to get brought up. Right. And I kind of feel for Verdugo in a sense, because it's almost like the Red Sox fans' general consensus is they don't want him here and they're rooting against him, which, granted, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of had, a negative reaction to it when we shipped off Betts for him. But it's very, very interesting. Regardless if you don't think the Red Sox are going to contend next season, which I don't think they are, there's a lot to watch for. It's going to be really, really interesting. But yeah, I don't know how the Red Sox are going to respond to this. This is a question, and these are things that are going to get brought up within the season, especially if he struggles. It's going to be something a lot of people reference, where you brought in a guy who's blah, 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 and he's not doing this, he's not doing that, and you traded off a guy who was your best player perhaps in franchise history. So he's in a very, very tough situation, which is something that, I don't know if everyone's sort of acknowledging.
I completely agree with you on that. And we sort of touched on it a few minutes ago when you talked about Brusdar Gratal, about how the Red Sox, backed out of that initial deal and really tried to rework it without the Twins because the Twins got very frustrated with how long the process of the trade talks were going. And in my opinion, this just really, I don't want to use the adjective diminish because that's too harsh, but it really didn't look that too great for the Red Sox and their reputation, and especially with Chaim Bloom's reputation, with the uncertainty on if they wanted to actually take Grandal or if they did not. And it just all the different reports that came out of, especially like if you look at the Angels trade that went through just because of this whole Mookie Betts trade debacle, and then you just look at what the Twins owner is saying about how frustrated he was. I don't know. It just really didn't look like a great look for the Red Sox on the unknowingness if they wanted to fully go through with the initial trade that they did.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's been a very, very, like I continue to say, disorganized and very unaware and out of touch offseason for the Red Sox, where they're completely going against everything they say. It took a 20-minute Google, not even like a 5-minute Google search for me to see what was wrong with Brewstar and why everyone was reacting the way they were. Because personally, I didn't know a whole lot about him when the trade initially went down.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact it's so, I guess, unprofessional being in your position and the fact that this is your job, that your fans are more aware of his issues than you are almost. You look at Chaim Bloom, who, again, I feel for because he's trying to satisfy both the fans and the owners who want two different things. And you gotta look, like, we brought this guy because he's so knowledgeable about prospects and he has such an insight on young guys, and yet that's what you got? That's what you brought in?
Right.
It's ridiculous to me that a fan's reaction goes, all right, we gotta pull back, we gotta redo this, we gotta sort of, get back to the drawing board and see what we can get. It's so unprofessional, it's so out of touch, and it's perfectly matching up what the Red Sox have sort of become based on this offseason alone.
I completely agree with you on that. But just really looking, I want to get your reaction on the two guys that we did get with Verdugo, because I was quite honestly very excited after I looked at both of these guys' stats. So the first guy is Jeter Downs. He was a first-round pick by the Reds, and he's still only 21 years old. And interestingly enough, now the Red Sox are going to have a Jeter in a Red Sox uniform, and coincidentally, he was named after Derek Jeter. But the kid's a shortstop and a second baseman, and quite honestly, just looking at his stats and looking at his amount of massive development that he has had over these last few seasons, I could quite honestly see him being the future second baseman in maybe the next year or two. Because in single A, in 107 games, he hit .269 with 19 home runs. And then when you look at his double A numbers, just as a former baseball player, 12 games, 5 home runs. Are you what? Come on! And if you just look at the kid's stature and his body figure, he looks like a very athletic second baseman shortstop, and not a guy that you could see hitting 20 home runs a season. But we saw him hit 24 home runs combined last season. And then when you just also look at the guy Connor Wong as well, who was reported as a catcher, but throughout my research, he also plays second base and third base. So, he's got that great versatility, but it'll really be interesting to see where the Red Sox really place him on the depth chart. But, the kid can hit. In Double A and Single A, he hit .281 with 24 home runs in 111 games. Like, when have you ever heard of a catcher hitting 24 home runs a season other than, let's say, Buster Posey and when Jonathan Lucroy a few years ago? But I just wanted to hear your thoughts on those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, Wong is someone I'm not too aware of personally. Jeter Downs was the one who really, got me back into this trade and gave me some positive outlook on it. Yeah, like you said, he's got sort of like a Mookie Betts almost sort of stature where he's not the biggest guy, but to generate that type of power and that type of bat, that's something we didn't see a lot from Mookie Betts when he was in the minor leagues. We didn't see him generating that type of power. He was scouted as anything to be a platoon infielder, and to see that from Jeter Downs so early, it's a really great sign. So he's someone I'm pretty psyched for. The Red Sox second base situation it's pretty wide open personally when you look at it. That Dustin Pedroia is pretty much done.
That's true.
Michael Chavis he's he's still a question mark. We don't know what's going to go on with him next. He showed some great signs of power and that he can play the position for an extended period of time, but there's still some situations and what went down in the minor leagues that maybe we don't want to talk about. But yeah, Jeter Downs is the one piece in this trade that personally I'm pretty psyched for.
I completely agree with you. And just touching real quickly on the second baseman, with Michael Chavez, he's been brought up as a potential first baseman option, second baseman option. The third base he can also play, but they also worked on him in the outfield throughout the end of last season. So we could really see him being in a Brock Holt-esque sort of position with the Red Sox. And then you also got Jose Pariza, which you don't really know if this guy's going to be the starting second baseman or he's got the versatility where he can play anybody in any place in the infield and any place in the outfield. So there's just so many question marks on the depth chart like we've talked about throughout this entire podcast. But really just touching on your frustration and what you talked about with John Henry and what he explained of why he traded Mookie Betts and what he really doesn't know, that the Mookie Betts trade wasn't really focused on trying to shred payroll. I just wanted to touch on really what he said during yesterday's press conference when he said, we were faced with a difficult choice. You can talk dollars, you can talk about metrics and value, but in the end, even though we are consistently among the highest spending clubs in baseball, with this year being no exception, we have to make hard judgments about competing for the future as well as the present. In today's game, there's a cost to losing a great player to free agency, one that cannot nearly be made up by the draft pick given. We've seen other examples of this recently. We felt that we could not sit on our hands and lose Betts next offseason without getting value in return to help us with our path moving forward. And so just looking at the words of we couldn't sit on our hands and wait to lose Betts during next offseason, just really looking at the time period when this trade happened, I really just don't understand how or why it had to happen, a week or two before spring training started when we heard the Betts trade talks really starting to amplify during December and January. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the time period.
Well, to begin, I don't know what, Northeastern or Boston College intern wrote that garbage for John Henry, but I didn't agree with a single word he said throughout that entire thing. You were very, very contradictory with Mookie Betts, how you intended to trade him early in the offseason. Then, reports were saying, he's going to be here opening day, sign him to $27 million arbitration. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what you sort of almost have to look at this from the perspective that it's all about profits and it's all about, maintaining money. You look at that same statement, and the one thing that jumped my eyes was the Nomar Garciaparra comparison, which was complete and utter garbage. Mm-hmm. You're comparing Garciaparra, who you traded like midway in the season, Brock Cabrera on, who did a phenomenal job at shortstop in 2004. It doesn't compare. Garciaparra wasn't the talent that Mookie Betts is. Mookie Betts is pre-prime. And, if anything, it's a shame that John Henry or whoever wrote that didn't have the guts to come out and compare it to John Lester, because he knows that he completely fumbled that one.
He also compared it to Jacoby Ellsbury too, which
it was so terrible. Jacoby Ellsbury wasn't there. After I saw Garciaparra, I didn't read after.
Yeah, he said Jacoby in there, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, because that compares. Jacoby Ellsbury compares.
He went to the Yankees, right?
Yeah, it's so completely and utter garbage that you're feeding the fan base. And the only number I'm rooting for to continue down is that ticket sales, because you can't sell me on this team personally, especially. And yeah, the only thing that can really justify or explain this is that you want profits to rise, because $500 million in revenue in 2018 apparently wasn't enough.
Very true, and we'll see what happens even with that investigation coming and how that will really sort of ramify anything or any decisions that the Red Sox are trying to make over these next coming weeks before the season. And we could even see that the investigation sort of impact what you were talking about with the sales at Fenway. But somebody who I think even not as much as Mookie Betts, but could be as comparable to really hurt the Red Sox and the excitement going into the season is Brock Holt just signed with the Milwaukee Brewers. If you had a guy other than Mookie Betts who was more fan excitement and more fan driven than Brock Holt was. I don't know if you can really name another guy. And just really just allowing Brock Holt just to walk away like nobody's business, especially when you nearly gave him, you nearly gave Alex Vertugo his number in number 12. And that really brought Twitter and Instagram into an uproar. But I just wanted to hear your response onto that and really who you think will replace him in his utility services on the Red Sox.
Well, when the that was a long time ago. That was the sign for me that Brock Holt was gone and he wasn't going to return. I'm personally I love Brock Holt and I love what he was able to do. He was a great story. He kind of reminds me in the sense of Daniel Nava, but he was always more productive than what he was able to bring.
Right.
It doesn't really upset me necessarily that let him go because Brock Holt's a guy, and I'm a big fan. I love it. Brock Holt is a guy that sort of needs to be on a contender to sort of really flourish his role because they're contending and they're not prepared to succeed. So bringing him back, I can stand that one. And I obviously understand he's really sentimental with the fan. Award, what he does, questioning the person he is and how in tune fans in the is. From business, I'm not completely torn apart on Brock Holt leaving, and I'm glad he's in Milwaukee. I'm glad he's on a contending team, and I wish him nothing but the best next season.
I completely agree with you, especially with just like the money aspect of it, because the Red Sox, you saw they signed Parise to, I think it was $2 to $4 million, and that was very similar to what Brock got. But most people thought that Brock could get 5 to 6 just because of his consistencies throughout the past few seasons. But just really just looking at the big picture of how this could affect what we touched on earlier in the podcast with the chemistry, but how this could affect the clubhouse, and with Mookie Betts and Brock Holt really being those guys that would be able to have those great relationships with different players that they've gone up through the system with. But really, just we saw Brock Holt be the entire energy, it seemed like, throughout the 2018 playoffs. And it was just something that was very eye-opening to me. And it just really solidified how important Brock Holt was to this clubhouse. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think the Brock Holt loss is going to be sort of more bigger to the fans than it will to sort of the on-field results. Obviously, the chemistry guy is really important and pivotal. But personally, I sort of take this as the Red Sox sort of jumped the gun. Like you said, his value, you thought he was going to make like $5 to $6 million. I didn't see that number necessarily being outlandish or out of question. But I think he's really going to flourish in Milwaukee. He's a real big sort of guy who thrives in contention and really can uplift your team. And Milwaukee's a team that's sort of on that rise in the National League, and a team that can very well be back in that NLCS contending for a World Series title.
Very true. And when you just really look at Milwaukee's depth chart, they got a guy like Eric Sogard at third base, and we could really see Mookie Betts really flourish over there at that third base position. It'll be really interesting to see how the Brewers utilize his versatility around the depth chart. But lastly, I just wanted to ask you, Gio, what is your final win-loss projections for the Red Sox before the season starts? Or just sort of like a range of how many wins you think that they should get?
I honestly see this team being within 80 to 85 at most. Mm-hmm. Honestly, it's a tough number, but again, this team, if in any season I've headed into a Red Sox season, is a very tough sell.
Right. I completely agree with you on that. And just looking at MLB's prediction that they came out with yesterday on Instagram, they had the Red Sox finishing 85-77. And just looking at that number, I didn't disagree with it whatsoever. And just as like a Sox fan, if you were to ask me if the Red Sox were going to get up to 87 to 88 wins, I would just quiver and be like, I don't want to, put my name next to that and solidify or really predict that is definitely going to happen, because I'm not confident whatsoever that they can even get over 85 wins. And so, we really could see this team exceed expectations. It's kind of funny hearing everybody's sort of comparisons to the 2013 Red Sox when everybody was all upset and everybody was downing the whole team. And obviously they were able to go on and extremely exceed expectations and be able to go on to win the World Series that season. But I just don't see this team doing that. If they were able to make the playoffs, I quite honestly see a lot of Red Sox fans being very surprised and obviously very happy, relieved, whatsoever, but just a very surprised look for a team that really doesn't have too much star power from what it looks like at plain view. But we could see a lot of different guys like, Benintendi continue to develop of what we've hoped him to develop as. And then especially guys like Devers. We could really see Devers turn into the superstar that he was becoming at the end of this last season. And so I just want to hear your thoughts on who you think some of the overperformers could be for this next season.
You can instantly go to guys like Chris said, really is due for his big breakout in a Boston uniform. Guys like Erod, full bullpen. It's like Devers, who then follow up his season and establish on this game. Both in last year. And then the doors open, obviously, for guys like Benintendi, who you just mentioned. We're still awaiting his development and his establishment as being what we thought he was going to be. Because what are we in, like his fifth season?
Yeah.
Make our game. This is a guy who was like our seventh over a few years back. Completely ran through the minor leagues, Jacoby style, and we're still waiting.
And just because him and Alex Bregman were in the same draft, there's a lot of different comparisons that they could have very similar sort of stat lines. And we've seen over these last few seasons, he hasn't even been able to get up to 25 home runs. And I've seen it on Instagram, like left and right, like all these sort of different reports. Benny's bulking up. Well, it hasn't seemed to really been working too much.
He did that the first season.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's been a while. So one last guy, it will be very interesting to see if he really does pick it up, is a guy like Nathan Eovaldi, who I think we could really see him. I don't know. I'm really hoping he comes back into what we were able to see him. Obviously he's not going to be exactly what Red Sox perceived him to be, like the product of the 2018 World Series, but at least a guy that is able to get a 3.50 ERA, lower than 4. That's just something that I'm really hoping for a guy like Nathan Eovaldi. But it'll just be really interesting to see with all these sort of different pieces that we've talked about today, how they'll really be able to perform throughout this season. And really with all the different confusion and really unorganized depth chart that the Red Sox do have at the moment, it'll be really interesting to see how it'll all pan out during opening day.
100%. And it's a weird situation. We're heading into a season where if they exceed expectations, if they contend, yeah, great. But does that really do just by the whole Mookie Betts thing? And because how ownership's going to interpret that. We're perfect. We don't do anything. We don't need to change anything. So it's tough. You never want to root against your own. But it's almost, necessary heading into 2020 with this Red Sox team and this, sort of situation with the chip group.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It'll be very interesting, and my eyes are going to be peeled to see really if the Red Sox could outperform all the different expectations that are being talked about with them. And so for all the listeners, you can hear all about the most recent news of any Boston sports if you go over to Instagram and Twitter on Boston Sports Report. Gio is the founder of that account, and he does a great job on giving a ton of different informative and analytical news and different topics that you never really think of as a Boston sports fan. And you really get the very quick breaking news that comes out of any stuff coming out of Boston. And then I also have my own account on Instagram, but I post everything about anything of the MLB, NFL, and NBA. So if you go over to Iggy Sports Talk and follow either my Instagram or Twitter, you'll see I post every single day about tons of different topics. So if you want any sort of great sports talk news, go over to Boston Sports Report and also go over to Iggy Sports Talk. So thank you very much, Gio. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And I definitely want to have you on again because we had some really great in-depth conversations, not only about the Red Sox team, but what we could be seeing over these next few years.
100%. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so thank you guys so much for everybody for listening. I really appreciate it. I really sort of apologize for the mixed match sort of days that I have been posting. I do really want to get a permanent solidified day of Sunday where I'm going to post every single Sunday, but that is going to be after I post this episode. So look for a new podcast every single Sunday starting during the Red Sox season. So thank you guys so much, as always, for listening, and I will see you guys next week.